Welcome to the Going Green podcast, and today we're going to have a look at what's in the news. We're going to have a look at some fusion, and generally we're going to talk about power in more general. So we, this week, heard about the United States and what they've done. They've gone for, basically, they've managed to get fusion working. We'll qualify that one in a minute, but basically what they mean is they got more energy out than they actually put in. So they put in an awful lot of energy, and they had 192 lasers. Not the sort of thing that you understand by a laser, which is just sort of one of these pen pointer things, and you go around. And they do work. You can hit the moon with one, no problem. You don't see it come back because it doesn't reflect well unless you can get the mirror. But basically, we've got this idea of fusion energy. This is the panacea of energy. This is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's going to do everything we want. It's going to solve all of the world's and human problems for energy forever.
Well, I mean, that's what they promise. It's one of those dumb things where, let's just take a side step away. So when they created, say, the fission bomb, it was hugely destructive.
Fission, you said there on that one, yeah. Fission, yeah.
Right?
Uranium, yeah.
Right, and then they discovered that through their research of fission, that they could basically do what is known as a hydrogen bomb, which is technically fusion.
So you set off an atomic bomb, basically a fission bomb, and that creates a fusion bomb inside.
Yeah. So anyway,
the temperature of a star, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So essentially, what they found was, the fission bomb destructive, but the fusion bomb they managed to create was sort of almost 4 times or more destructive. But also it was the size of how much they required to make it. They needed less thing for the more destruction, which then led to the idea that in their nuclear power, that the idea of fission, where you're basically breaking down elements.
Typically it's uranium, isn't it?
Uranium.
And plutonium.
Yeah. That release a lot of power, release a lot of energy, and then we can change into power. And then the point about that the fusion potentially, because of how much, I say explosive potential, but because of how much energy that has got, by basically taking 2, I say small things, but basically combining 2 things that has,
and that's hydrogen,
and that
hydrogen, of course, is not radioactive. So that's the advantage, isn't it?
Yes.
You're now taking non-radioactive things and you're joining them together, and what you're making, you're turning hydrogen into helium, and this helium is not radioactive either, but a lot of energy is given out.
Yeah, so you can suddenly see that the potential is that sort of, little bit of fuel and hydrogen readily available. There's an ocean full of it, and basically you can pump that into the power station and essentially get unlimited power, and all that you're making is helium, which is used elsewhere. So the whole chain of events makes a lot of sense and economically viable.
Yeah, but
this is the crucial problem: was unlike a bomb, which is fairly easy because you're using the power of an explosion, how do you create enough force to fuse 2 atoms together?
So it's 192 really high-powered laser beams firing at a very small capsule containing some hydrogen. Typically, they actually use deuterium, which is the heavier isotope of hydrogen, which is not very scarce, really. It's sort of less than 1%.
Yeah.
And perhaps some tritium as well. And they heat it to a reasonable temperature. I think it's approximately 3 million degrees Celsius.
Yes, I read that. The answer was it's hotter than the surface of the sun. and they were sort of saying it was one of the ridiculous facts. However, the point about this is it puts in enough energy in so that these hydrogen atoms, these deuterium and tritiums, will then eventually collide and have enough energy to form helium, and then by forming it, they then release the energy that you pumped in, and effectively,
And a lot more.
and extract both the energy we use to pump in and then some. And we're hoping that the then some is potentially enough to power, say, a small town. I say a small town where we're talking possibly a large. Yeah, the scale gets bigger and bigger the more of these things you do.
But there's a few problems, aren't there?
Yeah, there's been a few problems, and it's not the most exciting of problems. Essentially, is the power to create the temperatures that's required, has been astronomical. And one of the major problems that they were finding, and they've done lots of experiments for the last 50 to 60?
70 years, 70 years now.
Yeah, is that the power to go in and make a fusion reaction was so immense. It was actually daftly powered by a nuclear power station to actually pump in enough power. It's a hilarious little fact. And basically they said, well, we need to not go bigger, but we need more space to actually, they're thinking what a capsule is probably sort of the size of a normal pill. We're talking one of the, like a Lemsip pill capsules, gel coated capsules. That's the size of what they're basically heating up. And they're just saying how much stuff is required for all this is ridiculous. And so last year, although a couple of years ago, they said they were doing what is known as the Tormac one, which is basically a particle accelerator. It's not a particle accelerator, no mind. It's a plasma that's basically they're heating up, and then basically they're firing plasma at each other, and hopefully the plasma creates. Yeah. Anyway, they were doing lots of theoretical calculations and saying how much power going in, how much power out. And they said they managed to get net zero on their power requirements, as in the amount of power going in equals the amount of power going out. And they said to basically then, now we've got the size of working power going in, power going out. Let's say we go bigger. And they said they only needed to go 17% bigger in the size of the reactor chamber. It's an expensive reactor chamber, so that's
And one of the problems with these things is that the temperature is quite warm. As we just said, 3 million degrees Celsius. What are you going to put it in to actually hold this? And the problem is that anything you want to put it in, well, it's going to vaporize. So they use clever magnetic plasma bottles. So there is no bottle effectively. There's just a sort of a magnetic field trying to hold it all in. So that requires a bit of energy. I was having a look at what the US team did. Now, the US team said they managed to get out more energy than they put in. That actually wasn't true. They got out more energy than they put into this little bit of their reactor. But unfortunately, to try and get it all working, they actually put 100 times more energy in than they got out. And of course, how long are we talking these things lasting? And they're lasting now not very long, sort of matter of seconds.
Well, yeah, less than seconds.
Whereas, if I want to sort of, let's say, power my house, I'd like it on, well,
hours,
all
days.
day, really. Yeah, I was thinking all day would be nice, possibly longer than that.
But yes, the answer is this team in America, they're doing a very slightly different approach. They're not having this huge magnetic donut, essentially, when they're spinning things. They're not doing that at all, because they're using this capsule.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, capsule-based approach. You see them firing the lasers at it. So essentially, they're suspending the pill in the middle of a heat exchanger, which is how they're getting the power out. And then they're basically, think of like a colander, but a spherical colander with the lasers going in the attempt to fire and pump in enough energy onto it. Yeah. It's think of a traditional, well, it's a sphere and it's, I say, cool looking, and very sort of sci-fi and picture, look at it. But it is one of those odd things where it's, it is just a matter of, it's basically, they're not, they've got less requirements of less moving things, less heat in chambers, and hopefully this is a different approach that could be viable as opposed to the current method of basically having a large
Yeah.
beam of plasma circling around a magnetic pipe.
Well, the smaller you can make these fusion reactors, basically, the more cost effective it's actually going to be. So we're looking at really the idea of fusion being quite small fusion reactors. And if we can get those working, it really will be great. And a lot of these companies are hoping to sort of, by the 2030s, to actually get some of these things working. Now, they've still got an awful lot of problems. The first one is basically the scale problem. And once you get sort of, you see, the problem is the bigger you make these things, the worse it gets.
Yeah, the more expensive and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so you really want to try and make these things quite small, but it's basically, can we get this running at a sufficient scale to solve all the problems? Or maybe you use the only currently working fusion reactor.
And that's the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So that's the nearest one to where we live, isn't it?
well, this is the whole point. This is where the whole idea comes from in trying to do this, is the fact that there's a giant ball of nuclear fire. How many light years? I know it's something daft like
8 light minutes away.
8 light minutes away, you see. And it's this sort of, it works, but the problem is, you see, it's cheating. It's using gravity, which is, a force to bring things together. We're now trying to basically create the pressures of gravity by alternative means.
And that takes some energy.
And that takes a lot of energy, as I stated earlier,
So basically, what these people are doing, they're trying to build a small star inside a little room, aren't they? Basically,
yes.
And there are a couple of issues with this, like sort of the amount of energy you need to try and put in. So yeah, it is an amazing breakthrough they've managed this week, and in theory, all that the pundits are talking about, this scientific breakthrough can create limitless energy. But we're not there yet.
No.
Just because we've got it working sort of once and for a very small time, it doesn't sort of mean anything. They've done many of these experiments hundreds of times before, but this is the first time they've actually got more energy out of the process than they put in. They put in, wait for it, 2 megajoules in, and they got out basically 3 megajoules out. And that sort of is not bad, really. And if they can do that for a long period of time, then it's going to be good. Basically, what are we talking about with these sort of joules, and what do they mean? Well, it's sort of basically, in that short time, they made, for instance, a few billionths of a second, they made more energy than was on the whole of the US power grid. So yeah, it gives you some feel for the scale of how much they made. And then we mentioned that they did it for about a millionth of a second.
Yeah, so yeah, it's one of those things that, let's say you run it for the second, how much of the power grid could you run off for a second?
Yeah, it's not even a second, Paul. A millionth of a second.
I know. But it's that's the idea, that this huge, I say quantity, but is that it's so effectively easy to pump, take the energy out and just, dump it into the grid, essentially. And then basically we've got that usage. But now the next crisis is the how you extract that energy, because of course, if we get more efficient at extracting the energy out, then that means we can turn more, and not letting more energy in, but essentially we get more bang for our buck.
Yeah.
And that makes more power. And obviously then that means even though we run it for 1/1,000,000th of a second, we get the power associated with a full, I was gonna say second worth of power, for the grid.
So they're quite a they're good idea. They're not radioactive, but they are difficult. They are expensive at the moment to make, and they require an enormous amount of energy to go in. But then they can deliver an equally enormous amount of energy coming out. How is it different, of course, to fission? Well, we're talking about this idea of scale. If you want to build a nuclear reactor, they are big things, they're expensive things, and they require still people to go out and dig up some uranium, or they could use other things like thorium, and they could use those things, and they're pretty good. But the idea of this fusion reactor is that, in theory, it could be smaller and produce an awful lot more energy.
Yes.
So,
and the more
it's just difficult to make.
Yeah, and the critical thing is that there are no radioactive products produced, and the fuel source, and not counting power,
is virtually unlimited on in this world, isn't it?
Yes. So, that's the point.
Yeah. Just to give you some idea of how much fuel they actually use, we're talking a matter of a few grams of hydrogen here, fusing that together to make this enormous amount of energy. And it just shows you that if you take a hydrogen atom, or in fact you take basically 3 or 4 of these hydrogen atoms, and you sort of stick them together to make a helium atom, it actually requires less energy. So if each hydrogen atom's got so much energy in it, and then you make a helium atom with a lot less energy in it, what's going to happen to the rest? Hopefully, we're going to grab hold of that and power the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So I still think harnessing the sun is possibly still going to be easier in the long run. But let's look at what we've got going on this week. We're sitting here in beautiful sunny Hemel Hempstead. The birds are singing, the sun is shining, and the snow on the ground is sparkling. Yeah, we've got a nice bit of snow. Not what most people call snow. We've got 4 centimeters. I managed to measure here. 4 centimeters of snow. This is what the rest of the world call sort of a sprinkling.
Yeah.
It's enough to stop this country sort of in its tracks for a day or so. But we've got a little bit of snow and hardly any wind. So what does that mean? Well, it means, Paul?
Well, yes. The problem with all the weather conditions of having the snow and all those sorts of things was the fact that it's not windy. The air is still, the air is chill, the air is not moving. There is no
wind power.
No wind power. So unfortunately, they were reporting that because of this low in the wind, was that in a time of not crisis, but they were talking about,
well, it's cold, so people have all got their gas heaters on, aren't they?
They've got the gas heater on. They're using the the electricity supply, and they've been talking about having these winter shortages of fuel. And they're going through, and they were basically saying we pray, and this is the National Grid was saying, the amount of blackouts, if we needed it or happened to do so, those sorts of things could have happened if depending on how much wind we get. And obviously the problem was we're not getting any wind at the moment. And so they're basically scrambling and saying,
let's warm up the old coal fire, basically the coal-fired power stations, isn't it? Let's warm them up, ready to get them going if we need to.
Yeah, but they're actually reporting, daftly, it's not actually been I wouldn't say as bad as that. Then they actually found that because of all the everybody's basically put the heating on because it's been so cold. What they said they've actually done is they've cheated. They've actually just raised the base load of the nuclear power because they said, look, everybody's heating's on, and everybody's heating has been on, not fully, that's the wrong way to put it, but constantly on. And so all they've done is actually just raise the base power load, and that's done from the power stations or the nuclear power stations.
And the problem is with a nuclear power station, unlike the fusion ones, these ones, they take a long time to get going, and you have to sort of increase the power quite slowly over a period of days or many hours. And so they can increase the amount of power these things give out, because that's got to be the sort of something they can't sort of switch off at all. They can't easily cut down the power, but if everyone's using a lot more electricity, they can run it at a little bit higher percentage.
Yeah,
can't they?
so let's pretend they were running at 10 and they've raised it something down for like 12%, or all they've done is just raised it up a little bit. So basically the base load has increased, but the base load is actually keeping the base load on because it's not having this fluctuation of temperatures. It is just always cold. They're basically saying because there is this condition, they're saying they were panicking, saying about having less wind and sort of less solar. And then they're saying, well, because it's so cold, and with the cold snap, as they call it, they've just raised the base level, and that's actually working for us. Where they previously said they're going to do everything they could try, but they didn't know that it was going to do this. You see, they just thought the temperature was going to fluctuate, and that was the problem. But with this, it's just cold all over, and it's cold throughout and full stop. Then they said it's just simply raising the base load is the easiest thing to do, and they don't have to panic necessarily about the other supplies of other power generation, because of course they said when those things on, they won't turn them on until they now reduce the nuclear power base load down, because that's what it's covering. And they were panicking because they didn't want to raise it, but since they have, it's a different scenario. So it's where everybody were going to have these blackouts.
Now we're all right for a bit.
Turns out we're not going to have these blackouts of power. We might have cuts of gas, but that's a completely different story, because of just how much we're using. But because we're using this extra base load of electricity, people are saying that they're not needing to do their gas supplies because they've got this base load of electricity going through them all.
Yeah, so that's been really quite good. So we didn't help anything because we haven't made any electricity for a couple of days. One, because we had sort of miserable low cloud and fog, and the other one largely because the solar panels were covered in snow, and the top panels are now clear, and I'm hoping that as the sun shines on those solar panels, they will actually get rid of all the snow. They usually do quite quickly, and so hopefully we'll start contributing more electricity to the grid, and we'll be happy that we'll be sort of much more solar sort of powered than we have been for the last couple of days. So little wind, even though most of our wind's is offshore, and generally it's still quite windy out there, it's been quite calm, really, hasn't it?
Oh yes, they were talking about the wind, not the wind conditions, but saying because of what the wind's going, there is no major, unlike a low pressure system powered by the jet stream, there is nothing moving it. The jet stream's in the wrong place, allowing northerly winds to come down. Except, of course, the northerly, there's no pull from the northerly. They've just floated in, essentially to fill the void that the jet stream's created.
Slow moving weather patterns.
And so with the slow moving, there is no movement. Yeah, this is the whole crux of the problem. There is no movement. There is no problem. It's like, let's say, we had lots of the low lying fog. You see, we had, I say low lying cloud. It was the difference between, they said we'll receive fog, mist, and low lying cloud, and the answer was, what's the difference between the three of them?
Not a lot,
And
really.
the answer
Yeah.
wasn't a lot. It was, the mist that was, and then it's low lying cloud, and it's fog, is in terms of visibility. But is this idea that essentially nothing was moving, so nothing could take the fog away, so it just stayed. And then, of course, all this lovely moisture from the fog that's caused, because it was cold, it started to freeze. And so you have what is known as freezing fog, and that's creating basically a very hard frost. And so we woke up every morning or so and asked whether it's frost or snow. And it was quite hard to tell the difference. But it is this cold.
We've now had both, by the way.
Yeah. And many people ask about sort of, but it's global warming. How can we be colder? And they were talking about this and saying the actual idea is that climate will fluctuate, but the problem is actually fluctuating more and more to the extremes. As in, we've got this really cold snap, and then we're gonna go really warm. You compare November temperatures to today; it's a very big difference. And they were saying that this is what climate change is going to cause. It's not going to make change everything higher. It's just going to make the fluctuations.
Oh, it will make things higher, but just slightly higher. And that slight raise of temperature is what causes a lot of problems. So we are seeing a few more fluctuations. But if you consider how cold it is now, we manage sort of just a bit below zero. In the worst parts of this country, it got down to about, I think, about -9.
Yeah, yeah.
And
deepest, darkest Scotland was -15.
Yeah, I was talking to a gentleman over the road, and he said, "Yeah, don't call that sort of cold." He said he lived in Croatia, and he said sort of some weeks they wouldn't get above -20. He says, "You call this cold?" It's sort of, by comparison, it's sort of, this country doesn't have terrific extremes. Yeah, we are seeing it sort of dip quite cold, but all those odd bits of this country go down really quite low, as you said, sort of -15. That was just a small little pocket that got there. The rest of the country is just shivering in sort of just below zero temperatures,
Yeah,
really.
it's about something like nearly like -1 or just below zero. It is that sort of.
Yeah, and it won't stay there for long, will it?
No, it depends on, so the weather conditions of, is it going to be sunny? Because that suddenly helps raise the temperature up, because we're having all this low lying cloud and fog mist. It wasn't unable to get down there, so basically we were stuck.
Yet this morning I saw a nice thing in the sky, the sun, and sort of, and I could see the moon, and we had some sort of clear blue sky for a while. That then disappeared, but it's sort of, this is unusual weather. Generally, over the last few years, we haven't seen really any snow, and this snow wasn't very much, really. It was just followed by a cold snap, so it stayed. And this country is so not used to snow that when we do get a little bit, it causes absolute pandemonium. Yeah, other countries, they put snow tires on and off they go. Here, our road is very bad. I live on a little road which is on a hill, so it's good if you want to take the car down. Well, not really. It's not so good if you want to take it up. Down is a problem because at the bottom of our road we have a T-junction, and at the bottom of the road, when it's icy, I watch the corporation waste disposal truck dustbin thing.
Oh yes.
And he came up our road, and then he went down our road. Now, he didn't come up very much. He came up probably about just over a lorry's length, and he went down the same distance, except going down, his wheels weren't going round.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, so it's not very steep hill, and we don't get any gritters down our road, so it'll stay icy. We don't have snow now, we have ice. And that will stay for the next few days until we get some rain when it warms up again, and we don't get a nice white Christmas, but instead we'll probably get a wet one instead.
yes.
You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, having a look at fusion and other electrical issues at the moment. We'll be back next time for our last one before Christmas. And until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.